So here, in terms of where we are at in the text, then we have gotten to describing the kind of qualities of insight, special insight, this wisdom realizing emptiness, in that this is able to actually remove our afflictive obscurations, and it can also remove the sufferings of samsara. It is through this wisdom realizing emptiness that we generate this kind of pure wisdom that is actually able to eliminate both of the obscurations, those afflictive obscurations and the obscurations to omniscience. And so in terms of a fourth quality of special insight, it is able to develop what we call like the excellent qualities of thought and ethics. This is particularly referring to ethical conduct as it is understood on the second ground. And this is described in Chandrakirti's entry to the middle way. And there's a verse that describes this kind of ethical conduct that is no longer grasping at signs. And so one is able to have this kind of excellent conduct based upon eliminating that sort of grasping at signs through the wisdom realizing emptiness. So those are some of the qualities of this special insight. And again, we had gone through the importance, the sort of qualities of serenity, this single pointed kind of concentration. If we don't have that kind of serenity, that single pointed focus, then we're sort of like a butter lamp in the wind. The flame of that butter lamp can't really give us any kind of clarity. So this quality of serenity is the ability to remain stably. And once we have that kind of stability, we can then investigate within that kind of serenity with insight in order to really eliminate from the roots all of our afflictions, all of our obscurations, and therefore all of our suffering. So we've seen how serenity alone is not sufficient to do this. It's only able to temporarily kind of suppress those afflictions, manifest afflictions, but we need to have both serenity and insight in order to be able to get rid of our afflictions, to get out of samsara. And so we can, through the practice of serenity, attain these kinds of states of the form and formless realms, wherein we have gotten rid of those kinds of manifest afflictions of the desire realm. We can attain these really high states like endless space and endless consciousness and nothingness and so forth, all the way to the peak of samsara. But there's this danger of someone thinking with this kind of pride that, oh, I've attained liberation, when in actuality they are still within samsara and have the karma to fall back into the lower realms. So again, we need to meditate on emptiness, on this, develop this kind of insight in order to really liberate ourselves from samsara. And so again, what we have gone through is describing the kind of necessary prerequisites for serenity, like having a good place. This is all in the text. So to live in a conducive environment and so forth, to limit your desires and practice contentment, not being involved in too many activities, maintaining pure ethical conduct, and fully eliminating attachment and all other kinds of conceptual thoughts. And so we see these are the kinds of necessary conditions that we need to have in order to develop this kind of stability in meditation if we're really going to work toward it. So the conducive environment is then described by having these characteristics like providing easy access to food and clothing and so forth. And so again, if we're going to be developing serenity in this way, it's really important to be in like an isolated place where there's not too much activity, we don't have too many desires, but we also need to be able to get the things that we need, like food and clothing. And we also need to be with those that share similar views, that are holding similar ethical conduct. Particularly if we're in a really isolated place, it's not good to be totally alone, but rather to be with those kinds of people that are able to help one and have similar sorts of views. So we've gone through the kind of prerequisites for developing serenity, and now turning to where we had left off, it gets into the prerequisites of developing insight. So here, the kind of prerequisites then that we need for special insight are described. That's where we are picking up in the text. And so we've described those kinds of prerequisites for developing serenity. And those are really common to the development of insight as well. But for special insight in particular, it says we need, what are the prerequisites of insight? They are relying on holy persons, seriously seeking extensive instruction, and proper contemplation. So we need to rely upon someone who has engaged in investigation and analysis, has the kind of qualities that they have developed themselves. And then we need to seek out extensive instruction, hearing many teachings. But just hearing the teachings is not sufficient. We need to really reflect on these for ourselves, to contemplate in order to find certainty, to gain this kind of ascertainment that's really certain. And then we can go and meditate on those things and actually kind of effectuate change through meditation. But we can't do this without first hearing the teachings from someone else. And so we need to begin by seeking out extensive teachings. But at that point, it's really just at this level of we've heard it from someone else, and so we sort of accept, oh, they say this. And then we get into the point of reflection, of actually contemplating for ourselves. And we need to, as an individual, use our own reasoning and really think through this. Well, why is it like that? Why isn't it like that? What are the faults that it would be if it were that way or if it weren't that way? And so the kind of certainty that we gain from that kind of contemplation is really more powerful than the sort of level of just having heard something. But it's not sufficient to just know at that level that has arisen from our own contemplation. So again, just knowing these things is not able to really act against the powerful kind of wrong conceptions that we have habituated ourselves to since beginningless time. So grasping at things as permanent and grasping at a kind of self, grasping at samsara as pleasurable and so forth are things that we have been habituated to for lifetime after lifetime since beginningless time. And so just the knowledge that say, oh, I'm certain that things are impermanent is not able to remove our grasping at permanence, but rather it takes gaining that certainty and then meditating on it again and again in order to combat those kinds of wrong views that we have held on to for so long. So in our continuum, we have this strong grasping at permanence, grasping at a self, and it is only through first hearing the teachings about how things are impermanent and so forth, contemplating them, and then repeatedly meditating on them that we are able to finally undermine these wrong views that we have been habituated to for so many lifetimes. So generally, when it comes to, say, like manifest objects of knowledge, maybe just hearing something is able to give us the kind of understanding that we need. Like, oh, is there a person over there? And you can say, yeah, there's a person over there. And that completes the sort of level of understanding that we need. So when it comes to sort of manifest apparent things, maybe just hearing is a sufficient level to gain the kind of knowledge that we want. But here we're talking about identifying this kind of innate grasping at a self, innate grasping at permanence that we have been habituated to, familiarized with since beginningless time. And in order to counteract that, we need the kind of knowledge that is actually developed through contemplation and then meditation. It isn't just like, say, knowing things like blue and yellow and various colors and just like knowledge where hearing it once is enough to have knowledge of that. It's not beneficial to just hear the Buddha's teachings, but rather we have to take it to a deeper level. As the Buddha has said, bhikshus and scholars should examine my words in the way that a goldsmith tests gold by burning, cutting, and rubbing. Only then should my words be accepted, not out of respect for me. So when it comes to Dharma, when we are talking about Dharma, this is something where it isn't sufficient to just hear it and sort of accept it at that level, but rather one needs to strive to gain understanding through one's own individual reasoning. Even when it comes to certain worldly things, we need to investigate to make sure that we're right about something. We need to know that we're doing it in an unmistaken way. And so even so much more so when it comes to something like Dharma that is about lifetime after lifetime, where we don't want to be mistaken about what we are doing or where we are going. And so here we need to know for ourselves. It's not enough for us to say, oh, well, it's said that it's like this, or it's probably like that because it says so in the texts. That's not sufficient. As the Buddha has said, we need to take the words that he has spoken and examine them for ourselves in order to gain the kind of understanding that makes a difference. So this is explained by the earlier Kadampa Geshes as well, where they said that the sort of supreme benefit that we can give to others is explaining the Dharma and encouraging them in it. But as for the recipient of that, it's only really a benefit to them if they actually take those teachings and put them into practice. So if the recipient of our, say, explanations doesn't really advocate any sort of change, doesn't actually put those teachings into practice, then that's not really a benefit to them. So whether it benefits the recipient or not is really dependent on that person's own effort at understanding it, really putting that into practice. So here, then, when it comes to sort of the greatest benefit, again, when it comes to, say, giving someone Dharma explanations, if they actually take those into practice, this is the most beneficial kind of thing, not just in this life and for those that surround them, but in terms of lifetime after lifetime. So the real benefit of the Dharma comes from the practice of the recipient, of the one who has taken it into practice. That's how we benefit from the Dharma. So the supreme kind of benefit that we can give to others that's virtuous no matter what is, say, explaining the Dharma and so forth. But in terms of the one who receives it, the benefit really comes from their effectuating some kind of change through practice. So when we give some kind of Dharma explanation to others, it should be done with a kind of motivation, a loving motivation of thinking how it will benefit the other person. That's the reason for giving any kind of instructions. So when one is teaching, it's not about, say, gathering a lot of people, trying to get more people to accept what you say or spread the Dharma or strengthen this particular kind of view. But really, it's about benefiting another person, whether it's even just one person, through this motivation of love and compassion, of wanting to help them. That's really the fundamental reason for giving Dharma to others. It's not like trying to gather a bunch of people. I mean, when you are going to war, you try to get more and more people to sort of make preparations for that. That's not the kind of attitude that one should have in terms of explaining the Dharma. The whole reason is about creating a benefit for the other, even if it's just one person. So then turning to, again, these prerequisites of insight, they are listed as 3 here. They are relying on holy persons, seriously seeking extensive instruction, and proper contemplation. So here we need to seek out a kind of qualified teacher, one who has the proper sorts of qualities to be able to then give teachings to us. And then we need to seek out extensive instruction. So not just being satisfied with hearing a little bit of the teachings, but continue to seek out extensive learning and instruction. And then one needs to engage in proper contemplation, thinking about this again and again in order to understand the way that things actually are, sort of comparing the kind of understanding that we have gained through hearing with our normal way of thinking. Does this accord with the way that I normally see things? Is this the way that things actually are? And engage in that kind of contemplation again and again. And then in terms of what type of holy person should you rely upon, the person that one is relying upon should themselves have heard many teachings, have the ability themselves to explain them well, so who expresses him or herself clearly, and who is endowed with compassion and able to withstand hardship. So again, they should be well-versed, having heard many teachings, be able to explain well to others, and be motivated by love and compassion, wanting to benefit others, such that even if difficulties arrive, even if there are challenges in terms of giving teachings, they are able to withstand hardship in trying to give others the Dharma. So then as for the second kind of prerequisite, we have seeking extensive instruction. And so here it says then, what is meant by seriously seeking extensive instruction? This is to listen seriously with respect to the definitive and interpretable meaning of the 12 branches of the Buddha's teachings. So here, the 12 branches of the Buddha's teachings, there are many sort of varieties of the Buddha's teachings, different sort of categories within them, and one should listen to them in this way where one understands that there are some which are interpretable and some that are definitive. So there are teachings that were given by the Buddha that are in need of interpretation, that cannot be accepted just as it was said, but rather is explained for a particular reason. It's done with a kind of skill and means to bring a disciple to a particular understanding. And so we can't accept them just as they are, but rather need to understand the purpose for which they were taught like that. And there are other teachings that can be accepted as definitive, as describing sort of the situation as it is without needing that same kind of interpretation or leading to another meaning. So we should have respect for the Buddha's teachings, understanding that sometimes things are taught for a particular purpose, for a particular disciple, and therefore we shouldn't sort of dismiss things without recognizing that some teachings are in need of interpretation and others can be taken as definitive. And so here, as it says, the Unraveling the True Intention Arya Sutra says, not listening to superior beings' teachings as you wish is an obstacle to insight. So here, if we do not listen to the teachings of the Buddha, if we don't take those in, this is a great obstacle to being able to develop any kind of wisdom realizing emptiness, because we first need to hear the various teachings, and then we're able to contemplate them, and finally that leads to a direct realization through a kind of meditation that we are trying to develop. But if we don't first seek out those teachings, then we're not going to be able to develop insight. So in the Buddha's various teachings, we can see how he taught to various types of disciples and various types of sort of mental inclination or needs. In the first turning of the wheel of Dharma, the Buddha didn't teach things like we see in, say, the mind-only view, where there are no external phenomena and things like that. But rather, the Buddha taught that there is external existence. He really taught that things are arisen from their own sides. Other than speaking about the selflessness of the person, all other phenomena he spoke of as being really truly established from their own side. And there was a kind of external existence. And this sort of teaching meets the needs of certain types of disciples. And then we get into the middle turning of the wheel of Dharma, wherein the Buddha speaks of there being no kind of existence from the side of any object, talking about the lack of any kind of inherent existence and so forth. This kind of teaching that was given in the middle turning is appropriate for certain other types of disciples who are inclined to a particular kind of understanding. And then we get to the third turning of the wheel of Dharma, including this Unraveling the True Intention Arya Sutra, that speaks about the kinds of different types of phenomena, some that are established from their own side, compounded phenomena that, although they don't exist externally, things like forms and sights and sounds and so forth are established from their own side. But things that we imputed phenomena like mental labels and so forth are not established from their own side, and made these kinds of distinctions in terms of the sort of reality of phenomena. And so this was a design intended to bring about greater benefit for disciples, because various followers of the teachings need these particular teachings. So it's like if we look at how in society we deal with children, and we teach them in a particular stages so that they're able to come to a proper understanding. We don't teach them something that's way higher than what they are able to understand. So too, the Buddha taught in a way to meet disciples where they were at in terms of their understanding and mental aptitude. So here, then again, going to what it is when we talk about there being definitive and interpretable meaning. So here, again, this sutra, sorry, it says that insight arises from its cause, correct view, which in turn arises from listening and contemplation. So when it comes to initially listening to the various teachings of the Buddha, there are these two categories of those that are definitive and those that are interpretable or require some kind of interpretation. So there are different sort of understandings of the different philosophical schools regarding what the definition of these two is. But according to the Prasangika Madhyamikas, they would say that anything that teaches ultimate reality and accords with ultimate reality would then be teachings that are definitive, that don't require any kind of interpretation. But when it comes to the Buddhist teachings regarding things that are conventional, things like impermanence and so forth, these are actually teachings that require interpretation because they're going to sort of get at the ultimate meaning, but not directly. One needs that sort of interpretation in order to get to that. And so here, one might have this kind of qualm, like, well, it doesn't make sense that the Buddha would teach something that doesn't accord with reality. Doesn't the Buddha see everything in its actuality and see only the truth and also teach only the truth? Well, and while that is the case, we have to also understand that those who are listening to the teachings have various kinds of dispositions and needs and inclinations such that the Buddha teaches to those needs of beings. So some are unable to say, accept that there is no self right off the bat. There are those who are, say, like some non-Buddhist schools in particular, that if the Buddha were to teach them that there is no self and start with that, they could fall into this kind of nihilistic extreme where they think that there's nothingness. And so therefore the Buddha taught in certain scriptures that there is a self, whereas in others he taught that there is no self. And so this is kind of, we might want to see that as contradictory unless we actually have respect for the fact that some teachings of the Buddha are definitive and others require interpretation. So, for example, there was a case where there were non-Buddhists asking the Buddha, "Is there a self? Is there not a self?" And he actually just declined to answer, recognizing that either answer, either giving them, "Oh yes, there is a self," would allow them to just continue on in their same wrong views, but for saying that there is no self could create that kind of falling into a nihilistic understanding. So all of the Buddha's teachings are true, but they have a purpose in terms of meeting the needs of those very disciples that encounter them. So there are various sort of characteristics and inclination of various beings. This is why we see teachings for the being of small scope and middling scope and great capacity, and then we see teachings on the secret mantrayana and so forth. So whatever it is that we are really inclined toward, that we have a disposition for, that's what we should take up and try to put into practice. But we should also see or really have respect for all of the teachings of the Buddha, recognizing the kind of purpose of definitive and interpretable teachings, and see that there is a reason, a purpose behind all. So this same sutra, again, the Unraveling the True Intention Arya Sutra, says that insight arises from its cause, correct view, which in turn arises from listening and contemplation. So again, we need this kind of hearing and then the certainty that arises from our own contemplation, which leads us to develop the kind of insight arising from meditation. And then it turns to the questions of Narayana Arya Sutra, which says, "Through the experience of listening to teachings, you gain wisdom, and with wisdom, afflictions are thoroughly pacified." So here it is based upon our having heard something and then contemplating it, that we're able to develop wisdom, knowing the way that things actually are. And when we develop that kind of wisdom, we are able to then get rid of our afflictions in turn by contemplating the kind of way that things actually are. This expanding our understanding that comes from, again, first hearing many things, and then through that contemplating on all that we have learned leads us through repeated contemplation to develop the wisdom that arises through meditation. And this is what allows us to reduce and finally remove all of those kinds of mistaken attitudes like anger and jealousy and attachment and seeing ourselves as the most important, this really strong grasping at I. All of the kind of understanding that we develop is able to, with repeated familiarization, get rid of and reduce those kinds of afflictions that create our suffering. So then for the prerequisites of insight, again, we need a correct or a proper kind of teacher and to seek out extensive hearing, extensive learning. And then the third prerequisite is proper contemplation. So here, as it explains, what is meant by proper contemplation? It is properly establishing the definitive and interpretable sutras. So here, one needs to be able to properly distinguish between what is something that one can accept as it is, as teaching the ultimate reality directly, and something that is not suitable to be just accepted on face value, that it is taught for another purpose to lead to a particular intention. So again, as we have seen with this quotation about how the Buddha has said, bhikshus, you should examine my teachings like a goldsmith would gold by cutting and burnishing it and so forth. I'm not just accepting my words out of respect. Again, this is important that we use our own kind of reasoning and intellect in order to gain certainty. We don't just immediately accept what is taught to us. And really the basis of proper contemplation is being able to distinguish between that which is definitive and that which needs interpretation. So if we know this is something that can be accepted as it is, or this is something that is leading to another kind of intention, this is really critical for us to be able to engage in this proper kind of contemplation. And so, again, this needs to be free of doubt. If we are in the throes of doubt, we can't really make any progress. We have to find certainty in order to then be able to engage in kind of meditation. So when bodhisattvas are free of doubt, they can meditate single-pointedly. Otherwise, if doubt and indecision beset them, they will be like a man at the crossroads, uncertain of which path to follow. So if we are like at a crossroads and we have 2 or 3 different paths that we could go, but we're not really sure which one we should take, that's like trying to meditate when we still have some kind of doubt. If we haven't really ascertained or gotten certainty about our understanding, then there's no way that we can proceed with our meditation. We're not really going to go anywhere. But proceeding from higher to higher and higher paths is really dependent upon using our own reasoning to establish certainty that then allows us to engage in meditation. So here then, going back to the text, it says yogis should at all times avoid fish, meat, and so on, and so forth. It should eat with moderation and avoid foods that are not conducive to health. So here again, we've gone through the prerequisites of serenity and insight, and here then it sort of gives another general kind of recommendation in terms of like not, say, eating too much, wherein you're really heavy and sleepy all the time and so forth, that you should maybe even leave a part of your stomach empty for this sort of purpose. And so when we have then all of the conditions together to be able to, we've assembled all of the kinds of proper sort of prerequisites. It says, thus, bodhisattvas who have assembled all the prerequisites for serenity and insight should enter into meditation. And so here this kind of describes getting into the kind of a proper sort of meditation practice. So it says, when meditating, the yogi should first complete all the preparatory practices. He should go to the toilet and in a pleasant location free of disturbing noise, he should think, I will deliver all sentient beings to the state of full awakening. So here, when we're getting up in the morning, we go wash ourselves up and do that kind of thing. And then we go to a place that is free of noise. Unfortunately, when there is really loud noise around, or any noise at all, our mind kind of uncontrollably is going to go to that noise and pay attention to it. So we should ideally be in a pleasant location free of any kind of disturbing noise. And then we should set our motivation, thinking that I will deliver all sentient beings to the state of full awakening. And to be able to deliver all sentient beings to the state of full awakening, we ourselves need to become a Buddha. We need to attain this state which is free of all faults and has gained all good qualities. And so we should think that in order to do that, we need to develop all of these various qualities, the qualities of love and compassion and the wisdom realizing emptiness and so forth. And so for that purpose, we're sitting down here on the cushion to meditate. And so this then continues saying, then he should manifest great compassion, the thought wishing to liberate all sentient beings, and pay homage to all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas in the 10 directions by touching the 5 limbs of his body to the ground. So here we get into then the kind of practice of what we sometimes call the 7-limbed prayer or the 7-limbed puja with a mandala offering, which is really the sort of condensation of our practices of accumulating merit and purifying our negativities. If we could condense down the essential points of those practices into something really succinct, it would be these 7 limbs. And so these kinds of practices actually are extremely powerful. We can accumulate a great deal of merit and really have a strong effect of purifying our negativities by engaging in the 7 limbs, which is prostrating, offering, confessing, rejoicing, requesting, beseeching, and dedication. And so we begin here with a prostration. Again, we can make a physical prostration or be doing this by imagining all of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas in the 10 directions, and first bowing down to them with this kind of prostration, and then making offerings. So we can make actual offerings, but again, we can do this kind of offering where we are offering everything within the world, everything that is unowned, everything that we collectively sort of own or are a part of in terms of this planet. We can offer the sun and the moon and so forth. And when we are doing this practice, we should place the image of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, such as a painting, in front of him or in some other place. He should make as many offerings and praises as he or she can. So we can have actual representations of the Buddha's body, speech, and mind there in front of us, or we can be doing this just by imagination. We don't have to actually have those kinds of representations in front of us. And so this, again, is then when we are doing these sort of 7 limbs, the practices of making prostrations and making offerings and so forth are really powerful in terms of our accumulation of merit. And then we have the limb of confession. And so we recognize that since beginningless time, we have accumulated countless negativities, even really extreme, grave kind of negativities, like, say, killing another human. And so we don't remember all of those negative actions that we have committed, but we should sincerely try to reflect upon them and engage in the practice of purification, really generating a kind of regret and resolve not to engage in them in the future. And then we get to the practice of rejoicing. And so here we rejoice in all of the kinds of virtues of others, Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, ordinary beings, hearers, solitary realizers. And this is something that is an extremely important practice. It's also very powerful in that sometimes we can get jealous. We look at other people acting in a kind of virtuous way, and we might have the inclination to think like, well, I want to beat them. I want to do more than them, or we sort of want to put others down. As opposed to that, we can gain like the same amount of merit if we have a genuine sense of rejoicing in the kind of positive actions of other sentient beings. So rather than trying to compete with others or put them down or feel jealous, this kind of practice uplifts both ourselves and others. And so then we have the branch of requesting, and requesting the teachings of the Buddha. We usually symbolize this in terms of offering a wheel, which is what Indra and Brahma and the other deities did when, after the Buddha had gained full enlightenment, he declined to teach right away. And these gods said to him, disciples are sort sort of like lotuses. There are still some that are just barely coming out of the mud. There are others that are still in the water, and there are others that are fully blossoming above the surface. And so although disciples are at different stages, please give these teachings for the benefit of others. And so here we too should imagine not just the sort of Buddhas in our own world system, but there are countless world systems, and making this request to all those who are enlightened to teach and lead us as beings into that state of enlightenment. And then there is sort of beseeching, requesting that these holy beings remain for a long time. So this can be like those beings that are alive now, such as His Holiness, that they might have a long life, and so forth. So that's the sixth of these limbs. And then finally, as it's said in the King of Prayers, where we sort of wrap this up in the dedication, all of the merits that I have created through prostrating and offering and confessing, rejoicing, requesting, and beseeching, all of these I dedicate toward perfect enlightenment. And so again, dedicating with the same kind of motivation to attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings, this is a very powerful dedication, and it brings benefit continuously. Again, as we have talked about, when we dedicate our merits to perfect enlightenment, that means that they aren't going to sort of exhaust themselves in the way that, like, if you have a glass of water and we dump it in the ocean, that water isn't going to go away. Whereas if we have just a drop of water over by itself, it can easily evaporate and be gone. Where when we talk about dedicating our merits toward perfect enlightenment for all, they result in these excellent kinds of qualities. They will result in the excellencies of our enlightened body and place and entourage and so forth. But even in the meantime, they bring about good results. So here, sort of like a mango tree in the way that it brings fruit every year, this is how when we dedicate our merits, they continue to bring about fruit. And so again, we could do this in front of actual representations of the Buddha's body, speech, and mind, or we can just imagine those. And then we should sit in the full lotus posture of Vairochena, or the half lotus posture on a comfortable cushion. So getting into the sort of posture, we can sit in the full Vajra position if that is comfortable, but if it's not comfortable, we're going to end up just contemplating how uncomfortable we are. That's the only thing that we can really think about. So we could sit in a way like we see Tara doing sometimes, a sort of half Vajra. There are some people that think they are best able to meditate kind of lying down. If you're not falling asleep, maybe that is what works better for you. But if one is sitting on a cushion, then in this kind of posture, the back of the cushion should be higher up than the front. That's a good start to that. And then we'll get a little bit more into the body position. So here then describing the sort of posture of Vairochena, the sevenfold posture of Vairochena, we can sit in either the full lotus or the half lotus position, or whatever really is comfortable for us. And then it describes here the various sort of qualities of this posture, beginning with the eyes. So the eyes should not be too widely open nor too tightly closed. So there are those that like meditate by having the eyes wide open and say staring at something, some sort of visual image. It's possible to do some kind of meditation that way, but here we're not talking about having any kind of visual object. The eyes shouldn't be open and staring at something, nor should they be totally closed, but rather they should sort of rest naturally at the tip of one's nose. That's kind of the ideal way for the eyes. And then it describes that the body should not be bent forward or backward. So we don't want to be kind of like hunched over in our meditation, nor would we want to be, say, leaning back where you might just fall asleep while we're trying to meditate, but rather the body should be straight. And so the body should be kept straight, and we should turn our attention inwards. So the shoulders should rest in their natural position. So we want to keep our shoulders sort of in line with one another. We shouldn't have like one higher or lower, sort of a crooked way, but kind of keep them in a natural sort of position and straight as well. And the head should not lean back forward or to either side. So again, sort of like with our posture, we shouldn't be leaning back too far or forward too far. It actually describes that the nose should be in line with the navel. So if we were to say like take a mala and take it down from our nose, it should be right in line with our navel, ideally, so that we're not like leaning our head way far back or sort of bending it forward too far. And the teeth and lips should rest in their natural state with the tongue touching the upper palate. So this is really primarily about keeping our throat from getting dry. So when one has the tongue fully down, there's a danger of getting a dry throat. So keeping the tongue sort of on the top of the palate should help with that. And then we get to the kind of breathing. Breathe very gently and softly without causing any noise, without laboring, and without unevenness. Inhale and exhale naturally, slowly, and unnoticeably. So we shouldn't really be like breathing really heavily or strongly in sort of a way that we're like making noises or something, but it should be a relaxed kind of natural breath as we go in and out. It shouldn't be sort of overly labored or unnaturally slow either, but rather sort of in accordance with our normal pace of breathing. So here then, when we get to the kind of actual session, then the practice of serenity comes first. So the serenity should be achieved first. So when we are getting into the actual session of sitting down to meditate, we should first be working on our serenity. And so here, the two syllables that make up this term in Tibetan, the first has this sense of like pacifying, and the second is abiding. So the pacification is really pacifying all of our distractions, all of the places that our mind might go, in order to be able to stay focused stably on one object. So whether this is an object like the body of the Buddha, imagining the body of the Buddha and focusing on that object, we would then, as we're meditating on it, try to bring our mind back again and again in order to remain with this kind of stability and clarity on the object of our focus. And so whether this is something like just imagining the body of a Buddha, or thinking about love and compassion and impermanence or emptiness, or all of these kinds of topics that we may then take up as a topic of meditation, when one is engaging in serenity, this has the quality of being able to remain focused single-pointedly on that object with a great deal of clarity that brings forth a kind of bliss and pliancy of body and mind. So serenity, just describing the nature of it, is that mind which has overcome distraction to external objects and which spontaneously and continuously turn towards the object of meditation with bliss and pliancy. When one has achieved this level of serenity, it is like a sort of this blissful thing to continue to turn back toward the object of our meditation. So here, when it comes then to the kind of object that one takes as an object of meditation, one could really take anything as the object of meditation. But here, when one is engaging in a kind of Buddhist practice, we are going to focus on an object that is virtuous. So again, something like the body of the Buddha. We then take that kind of object, and we notice that our mind, say, we're naturally able to remain focused on something for a little while, but we have to bring our mind back to that object again and again. This is a process of lengthening our ability to remain stable and clearly focused on a particular object. And the main kind of obstacles to being able to do this are laxity and excitement. So excitement is this kind of quality of mind. It's sort of like a wildness of mind that's really mostly of a desire or attachment attachment kind of nature. We get distracted away. We're thinking about our jobs or things that we want or things that we need to do. And that kind of pulls the mind from the object of meditation. So excitement is an impediment to our having this kind of serenity meditation. And we also need to deal with the fault of laxity. Laxity is like drifting towards sleep almost, where there's some sort of stability to the mind, but there's a lack of clarity. We're getting too loose in our holding with our awareness. Like if we are holding on to a bowl, say, and we want to carry it somewhere, if our grip gets too loose, we're going to drop that completely. And if we're sort of holding onto it too tight, that's not really great either. But here, it's like, if we're holding the object of meditation too loosely and we fall into this laxity, it's like dropping that bowl. It's like not having the right level of grip on that. And so here, the method for dealing with these kinds of faults is using mindfulness and introspection. So again, these are qualities that we develop. We don't have them immediately, but we develop them over time. So mindfulness is that kind of awareness of the object. We have placed our minds onto something and we try to be holding on to that object. And then we need to use introspection, which is like a little spy in our mind to see, are we focusing on that object or not? Have we lost that object or not? So we need mindfulness that sort of brings up the object of our meditation and holds it. And then we need this kind of factor of introspection in order to become aware when we have, say, our mind has gotten distracted away. Are we still focusing on that object? So here we can see that when we are trying to meditate, sometimes we might hold the object with mindfulness initially, but then become distracted away. Our attention has wandered off somewhere else. And if we don't have introspection, we may spend a great deal of time just sort of meditating, but our mind is actually wandering off here and there, and we're just not aware of it. So again, we need the kind of mindfulness that's holding that object. And when mindfulness loses its object, we need to have the awareness, this introspection, which is like our little mental spy, to be able to say, oh, I've lost the attention. I've gone from what I was intending to be doing. So here again, describing the kind of nature, the essence of serenity meditation, it says, serenity is that mind which has overcome distraction to external objects. So has gotten rid of the sort of excitement and which spontaneously and continuously turns toward the object of meditation with bliss and pliancy. So there are the kind of having pacified those distractions to external objects and having the ability to remain stably focused with this kind of bliss and pliancy. So here, this is something that we develop over time. And once we train and train and train our minds, we're able to get to a point where when we place our minds on an object, we don't immediately lose that. We aren't immediately distracted away. When we're able to do that for a longer and longer period of time. And so over time, we're able to investigate and make sure that we don't have any laxity or excitement, and eventually get to this point where we develop the kind of bliss and pliancy of body and mind that is that comes about through this kind of serenity meditation, wherein we are able to remain for as long as we want on a particular object without any sort of difficulty. There's no discomfort or unpleasantness of body or mind once one has attained this level of calm abiding or serenity meditation. And so as we talk about with the kind of a way in which a Buddha engages or someone who has attained this level of meditation spontaneously and effortlessly able to place the mind in this kind of meditative stabilization on a desired object without experiencing any sort of difficulty, discomfort of body and mind. This allows us to remain in meditation for however long we might want, whether it's 2 or 3 or 4 hours. So it is this kind of state that one achieves when one achieves serenity. So here, then it it says, that which properly examines suchness from within a state of serenity is insight. So once one has developed this kind of insight, one is then able to use this kind of, once one has developed serenity, one then engages in a kind of development of insight within that state of serenity. So here, when we talk about serenity and insight, there is insight observing conventional phenomena. There's insight that can look into the various sorts of qualities of any kinds of things. So there is a particular kind of insight that we are seeking to develop here, which is the insight or the wisdom realizing emptiness. And when one engages within the context of serenity, this kind of investigation, whether there is, say, a self, and does that self exist from its own side. And so initially, when one is investigating those types of topics without serenity, you don't have the sort of power that comes from that mental stability. But when one has achieved serenity and the sort of mental and physical bliss and pliancy that come with that, one then engages in investigation and analysis, and such wisdom is able to actually bring forth even further mental bliss and pliancy. And so we have, in this context, the wisdom that is observing emptiness, but there are other types of insight or wisdom that one could develop. So this idea of serenity conjoined with insight can be common to Buddhists and non-Buddhists. There are non-Buddhists that are achieving certain types of a union of serenity and insight that leads to, say, the actual meditative concentrations in the form and the formless realms, all the way through sort of like limitless space and limitless consciousness, nothingness and the peak of samsara and so forth. Those are achieved through a unity of serenity and insight that is common to Buddhists and non-Buddhists. But here we're speaking specifically about the kind of insight that is examining suchness, or is examining emptiness. And this is what one is striving to develop as a Buddhist. So we'll stop there for today, as I believe that the time is up for today.